Every Christmas, we hear the same question. Who were the wise men? 3 kings on camels follow a star, bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh from somewhere in the Near East. But what if Scripture itself points somewhere else, somewhere farther, somewhere no one has ever seriously considered? Today, you're going to hear a story that has been hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years. Tradition says the Magi were a priestly caste from Babylon who were experts in astronomy and Old Testament prophecy. That idea comes from Daniel 2, written 6 centuries before Jesus was born. But by the 1st century, something major has changed. The New Testament uses the word Magi in only 2 places. The first in Matthew 2, which is in the plural form, and then in Acts 13 in the singular. Elymas, a man from Cyprus, a sorcerer, not Persia or Babylon. That's a problem. If the Magi were still a formal Persian priesthood, Luke would never use it to describe a sorcerer from Cyprus, which means this: by the time of Jesus, Magi no longer describes an ethnic group or a priestly caste. It simply meant a magician or a wise man of sorts. In other words, the field is wide open. Matthew is not pointing us to Babylon. He's pointing us to the east, even farther east, beyond anything tradition has imagined. And that brings us to a second problem. Luke gives breathtaking detail about an Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8. In a single sentence, we discover the man's ethnicity, occupation, literacy, faith background, and mission. In contrast, when Matthew introduces the Magi, we're provided one cryptic phrase: Magi from the east. Logically, if the word Magi meant a priestly caste from Babylon, the phrase from the east is not necessary. Of course, they'd be from the east. That's where Babylon is. If these men were high-ranking officials from a famous priestly order, Matthew almost certainly would have said so. Instead, the Bible leaves them deliberately undefined, almost as if God preserved their identity for a later discovery, a discovery connected to prophecy. Because Matthew doesn't tell us who they were or who they are, but Isaiah does. Long before Matthew ever wrote about the wise men, the Old Testament described them in detail. Let's walk through 4 biblical passages. First, Isaiah 49, the call to the islands. Isaiah sees the Christ child still in his mother's womb, hidden and concealed by God. Then he announces who is being summoned to witness this hidden child. Listen to me, O islands, you peoples from afar. Isaiah 49, 1-2. Before Jesus is born, God calls out to the distant islands across the sea. And then number 2, Isaiah 60, verses 3-6, then describes these seekers. First, their status as kings, not necessarily monarchs, but men commissioned by kings. This matches Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to search out a matter. Then their route, first by sea, then by camel through Sheba, a maritime to desert journey. Then their gifts, gold and frankincense. And then their message, they return proclaiming the good news. And then thirdly, Malachi 1, where that message goes. Malachi gives us the directional clue. From the rising of the sun to its setting, my name will be great among the Gentiles. Malachi 1:11. Rising of the sun is a geographic description. The worship of the Magi reaches the Far East. And then Matthew 2 picks up exactly where Isaiah and Malachi left off. Matthew 2 begins with perfect continuity. Magi from the east, literally meaning the rising, have arrived. These men came from the lands of the rising sun. They carried royal authority. They brought gold and frankincense and myrrh. And they came and witnessed the concealed child. And they would take that message back home with them. The Old Testament and Matthew give us a coherent profile from distant islands, from the land of the rising sun, acting under royal commission, traveling by sea, then by camel, bearing gold and frankincense and myrrh, carrying home the good news, All of this is the biblical description. Now the question becomes, is there any record, any trace in the Far East of a first century encounter with the Christ child? Shockingly, yes. And it starts with 4 ancient kanji used to illustrate the climax of the Magi story. Matthew 2:11 describes the climax of the Magi story in a single sentence. They saw the Christ child with his mother Mary, and they fell down and worshiped him. 3 elements: child, woman, and bowing. If the Magi were truly wise, they would have preserved the memory of this moment. And maybe that's what we find encoded in the symbols of kanji. Watch what happens when we examine these kanji characters. Here are a few questions that go along with this. What do woman and child reveal? In kanji, woman and child equal love. A mother with her child, which is what we're told the Magi saw, mirrors the very heart of the gospel. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, John 3:16. The Magi may have recorded this image of the woman and the child in their own language to express the word for love. What does the act of bowing then reveal? The kanji for bowing breaks into 2 components: behold and the second. The Magi's act of worship visually declares the identity of the child. Jesus isn't just a baby. He is the second Adam, the one Paul describes. The first Adam became a living being, the second Adam a life-giving spirit, 1 Corinthians 15:45. This is the message the Magi would later carry home. What happens when we gather all 4 characters together? Take the 3 elements Matthew describes and break them into their 4 kanji: behold, second, woman, and child. Just as we were able to combine the first 2 in the list to create the word to bow, and as we combined the last 2 in the list to create the word for love, we can combine the middle 2 to get the word virgin. Now read the sequence. Behold, the virgin is with child, Isaiah 7:14. Matthew describes the scene. The kanji preserve the prophecy, and both point to the same reality the Magi witnessed with their own eyes. The Magi Matthew is writing about were not mythical kings, and they're not Persian priests, but they may have been men from the islands of the rising sun, called by prophecy, commissioned to investigate a divine mystery, guided by a supernatural sign, bearing gold and frankincense and myrrh, witnessing the woman and the child, recognizing the second Adam, bowing to the Son given in love, and returning home with the good news. A message so world-shaking that they embedded the good news in their own kanji characters, which suggests they may have been the first evangelists to the ends of the earth. They were, after all, bearers of good news, as Isaiah 60 verse 6 declares. So the next time someone asks, who are the wise men? The answer may take us farther than tradition ever imagined, because the scriptures, the story, and even the symbols of the Far East all converge on one breathtaking possibility. The Magi were the first outsiders to witness the love of God in human form and carry that message back to the rising sun, just as Paul the Apostle said. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? How will they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? How will they preach unless they are sent? Just as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news of good things. However, they did not all heed the good news, for Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed our report? So faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. But I say, surely they have never heard, have they? Indeed they have. Their voice has gone out into all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. But I say, surely Israel did not know, did they? First, Moses says, I will make you jealous by that which is not a nation. By a nation without understanding, I will anger you. And Isaiah is very bold and says, I was found by those who did not seek me. I became manifest to those who did not ask for me. Romans 10:14 through 20.